So this is on generative AI and the shifting scientific landscape. And I know you've been asking other people what AI might do, how it might be disruptive or helpful or who knows what in other fields. And so I'm going to give you my perspective from having been an interdisciplinary scientist for many years, from seeing machine learning and AI really emerge, and talking a lot with Jim about that actually. And now this time of generative AI, which is really shocking to many of us, and it inspires us and it scares us. Okay, so my own personal experience with using Gen AI in basic science is in a strange area for me. I've worked in many, many different areas, but not in chemistry or materials science until the last 2.5 years or so. But it is an area of basic science where we discover and make new materials. And I kind of fell into using Gen AI with experimentalists. And this has, I mean, we've been somewhat successful in this, but this has led me to feel not just on an intellectual level, not just on a, leader of the college or research group level, but on a visceral level, that the AIs are really becoming our collaborators. And so how do we respond to this? I'm going to give a primer on Gen AI, just very brief one, because you probably heard some words, and so maybe this will put some other words to those words. Then I'll talk about the work we've been doing in material science, but the whole time that I'm doing it, I'm thinking about how can we use this in other sciences besides material science, and then can we, and to what extent, and can we do this in math? And I don't think we're nearly there in math or in theoretical physics yet, if we'll ever get there. However, I am going to start with some reflections on Jim. Yeah, he's got a cigarette there. I was a smoker for 30 years, a heavy smoker. So one of the many things that Jim and I shared. We talked with each other, and when he would be coming up with a new mathematical proof for something, he'd get very excited about it, and he'd tell me about it. And I'm a mathematical physicist, so Chern-Simons was very much a part of mathematical physics. But the other thing that we really connected on and that I miss so profoundly is really what sounds awful, but it's not awful at all. It's institution building. It is thinking there is something big on the horizon. I don't know exactly what it is, but I sense that it is there, that it is coming. How do we bring really smart people together, get them interested, and then create institutional structures and incentives that provide fertile ground for people to get together and move fields forward. And where I am now has a lot to do with Jim. So Jim and I started talking a lot about machine learning and AI and science. I think around 2013, we really started talking about it a lot. He called me in because I had groups in AI plus math, physics, economics, social science, biology, medicine, that I built at Microsoft, and he was feeling like it was really going to start affecting fundamental science, and how should he be responding to that? What should he be building? This was before he hired Leslie, and before he established the Flatiron as a much broader institution a few years later. So we talked about that a lot. He even tried to encourage me and my husband at some point to leave Microsoft and go to him and do something, but that wasn't right for us at the time. But then in 2019, I had an offer from Berkeley to go and try to found a new college there, the first new college since the 60s. Now I know why, because it's hard to found new colleges. Universities are both the most progressive and the most conservative institutions, and they're conserving what's wonderful, so it makes sense. But anyway, so the provost at the time, Paul Alivisatos, called Jim up and he said, Jim, you know Jennifer Chayes? And Jim said he did. And he said, can you help me convince her to come to Berkeley and do this? And so I saw Jim, and Jim said, this is what we've been talking about, right? We've been talking about data science changing everything, and you've been running these interdisciplinary groups, and Berkeley's a big place, and also don't you want to build something that will last beyond you? Because when you do things at a company, which is what I had done, there are hundreds of people who last beyond me. There are, a couple of hundred people who went through as our students and postdocs. And, so that continues, but the institutions don't continue. And of course, he said in Berkeley is, the best place and blah, blah, blah. So I went, and whenever I run into problems, I really miss being able to talk with Jim, because we explicitly discussed what you do to catalyze research. So now I'm going to jump into slides that are covered with words and stuff. Just don't look at the words unless that's the way you process. People process in different ways, okay? And just think of it a little bit as like wallpaper background. I just take you through this, and let me see how much time I have. Okay, great. So this is a primer on Gen AI. So you probably heard about transformers. So transformers were a real breakthrough in the architecture. They allowed things to happen much, much faster. And there's an encoder, decoder. It takes in these tokens and it makes vectors. And so when you think of large language models, the way they started out was just like, completion, okay? When you're typing and it suggests the next word, okay? I mean, it was amazing at first when it suggested the first letter, then the first word, and then these things, you fed in more things. And what it's doing with these words is it's embedding them in some space in which they're related to each other and trying to learn what that space is, okay? I'm putting words up, and like girl and woman are near each other and other things are near each other. And one of my researchers at Microsoft, noticed early on in this whole thing that, these early examples of that would always spit out, woman is to man as doctor is, man is to woman as doctor is to nurse. And you would, it just spit out all these horrible associations. It would. So there are these horrible associations that we have in our language, okay? Anyway, so it's embedding them in this space, and it's trying to figure out how they're related to each other and what might the next word be. Okay, and they do this for the 3 words out and 4 words out and da-da-da-da, and okay, it's all making sense. I'm putting in more data. I'm, reading more stuff from the web. And then, boom, all of a sudden we see flickers of something that looks like intelligence. It is bizarre. What happened? Now I go back to my physics, okay? Phase transition. And if I were, a 30-year-old instead of a whatever old, and I had, 40 years ahead of me, I would be doing this mathematically. Okay, so I worked a lot on random networks, and I can have a very simple physics model of a phase transition. I can have endpoints in space, and at every point, I can flip a coin. So I have endpoints, P over N, it comes up heads. And so I flip these coins, okay? And one minus P over N, it comes up tails. And I just do this with these endpoints, and every 1 point to all the other endpoints, or N minus 1 points, and I keep increasing P. And at first I get these little clusters, because P's small. And then at a certain point, boom, there's a cluster that reaches across the whole system. This is the simplest example of the kind of thing you see when a magnet magnetizes, or water freezes into ice. I mean, that's technically a different kind of phase transition, but all of a sudden, in a medium that seemed to have no order, you find order. I hit one side of the ice and I feel it on the other side, okay? And that doesn't happen when it's water. And so what has happened in this embedding space is that a cluster has formed that reaches across the system. There is long-range order. So I start doing one thing, and all of a sudden it is drawing on information that is really remote, which is kind of what we do, right? That's what we do. That's what it's doing. Somewhere between GPT-2 and GPT-3 or 3.5, long-range order appeared in the system, okay? So that is what's going on in the embedding space. Here I am, I'm moving so much, I don't even know where I here it is. Okay, so a lot of slides, but just think about that. Long-range order has formed. You tap into one part of the system, and all of a sudden, there are parts far away that you're tapping into. Okay, beyond simple LLMs. So started with language, but then they put in video, and then they put in audio and other kinds of things. And then there are also reasoning improvements. And these are actually, so there's chain of thought reasoning, like we do, like we do with a kid, or with a student, break it down. Don't just give me the answer, break it down, okay? And that creates tremendous improvements. Just break it down. Show your work is what you're basically saying to the LLM. Show your work, okay? And then there's inference time compute, which is think more in the middle of doing your calculation, and that's really helping a lot. Now, one of the big problems with LLMs is that they're very data hungry, and they're very compute hungry. When it's finding these weights, what it's doing is it's finding the connections between all these words and concepts, and every time I add one more, it potentially has connections to everything else. So as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it's really expensive. It scales exponentially. So it starts using up a lot of data, and it starts using up a lot of compute time, okay? And it's exponential in them. And as you look at these models, how much they cost. So the big models are really, really expensive, and this is why OpenAI and Gemini at Google and all these places are just pouring in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to train these things. Okay, that's the pre-training of them. However, post-training is something that we can do in specific regimes. So, when I have a grad student come to me, I haven't preloaded them with all of physics or math, okay? I am post-training them, okay? They got their mind, I'm post-training them, okay? And that's what you're doing when you post-train an LLM. You are feeding particular stuff into it. You are saying, this is interesting and good and right, and this is wrong, okay? And you very carefully curate what you give them, and you work with them, and you prompt them in various ways, and you get into a rhythm with them where you are feeding in data in ways that when they start responding to you, they're responding intelligently, okay? And seems like a crazy thing, but to me, when we really carefully, and people say to me, oh, I tried LLMs here and they don't work. That's like saying, oh, the student walked in, this potential graduate student, and I gave them a problem and they couldn't solve it. So that grad student doesn't work. I mean, the grad student works. You were not a good teacher, okay? And so to say I tried LLMs on this, I hear people say it all the time and it didn't work. It's like, no, it's not. It is an interaction. And, okay, I also deeply, deeply believe that while we have enough language out there, we have a lot of language on the web, okay? We don't have all that information about biology, about how a cell is working. We don't have all that information about chemistry and the way every atom can bind to every other atom and form every kind of molecule and material and react in certain ways under certain conditions. And, I was just at a meeting of all these AI experts in which somebody said, well, in order to advance AI for science, we have to make more data. So we have to make the data more readable by the AI. I'm like, there isn't enough data. Enough data has not been created for that. And so what do we do when not enough data has been created? In a baby, not enough data has been created. What does a baby do? A baby tries something, and from that, gets some feedback and tries something else, and tries something else, okay? And so, this is what Mate, one of my collaborators and co-founder of Databricks, he said, deep learning works provided you can acquire lots of data or get a few thousand examples and an interactive environment. And that's what you're doing if you couple deep domain knowledge in a field, AI and experiments in that field, and you do the experiment and it gives you the feedback. That feedback cuts out the spaces where you're searching for answers are really high dimensional. They're huge. But the data I get back cuts out a whole part of the space. And then I go on with that, my very smart LLM that I've trained, okay? And by the way, we even trained them to ask questions. We gave them a paper and we said, ask me some questions about this. And like my chemist colleagues, their mouths just dropped open. They said these are like better than any seminar questions that are asked in our seminars. They can get really good, but you have to work with them. So, one other thing, diffusion models. And I'm not gonna have much time to tell you about my work, but it's okay. Diffusion models, so what is a diffusion model? So Sora and stuff like that. So in Sora, what a diffusion model does is it takes all these photos, let's say, and I'm going to want to generate for you a Van Gogh that looks like your cat. You give me your cat's picture and you get a Van Gogh style picture of your cat. So how do I do that? I take photos of cats and photos of a lot of things, and I add, or lots of Van Gogh's photos, and I add a lot of noise to it. And now it's just a mess, and I can't see it anymore because I messed up too many pixels. And then what I do is I learn a model which undoes that noise, okay? And so as I'm learning these connections, I'm learning how to undo the noise and undo the noise for another picture and undo the noise for another picture. And what I've generated is a backward stochastic differential equation which undoes noise. Now, I give it some random noise and it produces for me something that's denoised. Okay, so that's how those work. Those need some pre-training. We use those too, except instead of having them dream up pictures, we had them dream up chemistry. Okay, so we took real chemistry, we made it noisy, we had it denoise the chemistry, and then it could dream up new molecules for us and new materials. So the specific class of molecules is invented by a wonderful guy named Omar Yaghi, who is a professor at Berkeley. He's won the Wolf Prize. He's won about 60 prizes. These are really cool materials. They're the most porous materials known to man. 1 gram, like a raisin, less than a raisin, has the surface area of a football field. And they are designed specifically to take up particular molecules and bind them. Because they're so porous, they can really bind a lot. Carbon dioxide, that's why I got interested, because there are ones that pull carbon dioxide out of the air, which would be really nice to do, okay? Greta would like me if I could do that. She'd rather I not create carbon, but she'd like me if I could pull carbon out of the air. Or it can pull water out of the air. Or it can carry a protein, and it can also release it. Or it can carry a protein to a certain part of the body and release it for therapeutics or many other possible things. But it would take 2 to 3 years by someone, Omar invented these 30 years ago, take him 2 to 3 years to synthesize one. Okay, you don't have to look at all this. So these are little memes from some of our papers. We just fell into this. We first just had it do text mining, and then image mining, and then we finally got like a whole research group. So what we had was we made a whole research group. Omar said, let's look at everybody in my lab and let's make an LLM. And we didn't know these were called agents, because at the point at which we did this, nobody had talked about agentic AI. But these were agents who did all the different things in the lab. And we iterated with experiment. It was all roboticized, and each experiment maybe took us an hour. And all of a sudden, what used to take 2 to 3 years to synthesize one of these things took a week or two. It was like a factor of 50, okay? Because it also took us to interesting synthetic pathways. Then we said, okay, well, can we dream up new ones? So then we had the thing like the Van Gogh version of your cat, but on molecules, okay? So it's like dreaming up all this stuff. But then, oh my God, if you dream up all this stuff, then is any of it meaningful? And so then we used all kinds of other machine learning ways of analyzing them and trying to figure out what their properties might be to cut down on them. And finally, we got to this thing where you say, I want a material with these properties. I mean, this is the ideal. We're doing it a little bit now. And I go through and it'll dream up things for me, and it'll tell me, instead of doing density functional theory calculations, which are so expensive, I'll do ML versions of them, which are less expensive. But the important point here is that it is coupled with experiment. Every time we do it, we couple it with an experiment. I mean, the chemistry world really like this. I kept putting it on their covers. Okay? And we've even got a company, because I actually would like to pull carbon out of the air fast. And it seems like the government's not going to support that anymore, so maybe a company will. In other scientific domains, in experimental or observational sciences where I come up with something, I either look in a telescope somewhere or I run an experiment in my lab. I very, very, very much believe that this will be generalizable. I also believe that it is impossible without domain experts in the sciences, because, I mean, could I teach a biology graduate student how to do biology? No way, okay? Just no way in the world. And it is really important that there is this very tight coupling of AI experts and domain scientists. Can we do this for theories, for what's after quantum field theory? Can we do this for mathematics? I'm not sure. I am sure that there are ways in which LLMs can help us. They can certainly verify things, which is very, very useful. Doesn't mean that they never make mistakes, but I think of it like I'm working with a student. They don't, my student's working with me. They got to check my work. I make mistakes too, okay? And I know that David is talking about maybe making significant investments in lean. So I don't know how far this will take us. I think we may have to do more pre-training too, because the baby just isn't smart enough yet, okay? So what can we do to accelerate this progress? For scientists who do experimental or observational science, where your experiment or your observation is ground truth, so people also say, well, you can't do something because it hallucinates. Well, if every time you do an experiment and you get a result, it's not hallucination. I mean, that's okay, I've got a result from an experiment. What do you care who told me what experiment to do? I've got a result from an experiment. So if you can iterate with ground truth, I believe that you will be able to really use these things as collaborators. For university administrators, I think we have to create institutional structures that enable deep collaboration with all the incentives that entails. And for young faculty, tenure and things, these are important incentives. So we are in the process, and Rich knows this, of creating a faculty holding entity with computational biology, computational physical sciences, computational environmental science, let's see, data as societal infrastructure, which is very interesting, computation and societal policy. Some people from the law school and the public policy school are moving part of their FTEs into part of their positions into this, and computational economics and business, which, maybe that's where Jim would have played with the soybeans many, many years ago. Okay, and for funders and donors, I think one of the most helpful things we can do is fund open source models with open weights, because the scientists can come in and modify those weights with their domain science. So the people who say, let's lock this up in a few big companies, no, that's why everyone's using DeepSeek. Okay, all of my collaborators in the US are using the Chinese one because it has open weights, okay? And I hope Mark Zuckerberg keeps doing things like Llama, but people are worried maybe he will start, not having open weights also. So funding open source models with open weights, and fund interdisciplinary research teams of computer scientists and domain experts to go after big problems on at least a 5-year time scale. And then, of course, we should all ask ourselves, what would Jim have done? Because I ask myself that all the time. I ask, what would Jim have done? Thank you.